This was probably a couple of years ago by now. I was laying in bed watching ASMR videos, and while I was searching for a new video, I had no other video playing, so it was just total silence in my room. Suddenly, I hear this low, deep growl from the end of my bed, right in front of an old boxy TV that my uncle gave me not too long before this. Mind you, I've never heard this kind of noise in my room before. I got up and checked around my bed to see what could have made that noise, but couldn't find anything to replicate the sound. At this point, I had a pet rat, but she had never made a noise even similar to that in any way. Not even when she was playing with her toys. I started to panic, but just a little, since I've had strange experiences before. I texted my boyfriend, and of course, he didn't believe me, and I quickly got over it. A couple of weeks later, I had my boyfriend over for the night, and I was sitting next to my bed, but at the foot of it, so basically right next to the spot I heard the growl last time. I had a blanket over my head like a hood, so my peripherals were blocked and my hearing was very slightly muffled. We were just having a late night conversation about the paranormal at the time, when suddenly I heard the low, deep growl right in my ear. And I mean, it was pretty loud for having muffled hearing. At first, I thought that even if it sounded very vocal, maybe my boyfriend ripped a good one and it just resonated through the mattress. But I looked at him and he wasn't making the guilty face he usually does, and was instead staring at the foot of my bed. I asked if he farted. He said no. I immediately took the blanket off and asked if he heard it too, and he said yes. I yelled, "I told you so!" Then we proceeded to try to figure out how to replicate the sound. We couldn't. My boyfriend, who didn't believe me before, was scared shitless. He was so scared to leave my bed or be alone, he almost begged me not to go to the bathroom. He also told me that when the growl happened, he saw my closet door shake a little from the corner of his eye. I couldn't see that because of the blanket around my head, so I can't confirm, but I believe him because I trust him. After a few months, I rearranged my room because I get bored easily. The placement of my TV and my bed was swapped, but my bed was horizontal to my TV now, so I could watch it easier. Anyway, I started noticing my TV was on in the morning, or I would wake up to its light in the middle of the night, and it was just a blank black screen, because I didn't have any sort of cable or satellite antenna hooked up to it. It was strictly for gaming and watching movies. Anyway, it was weird, but I shut it off and forgot about it every time, until I started staying up late. I'd stay up until 4 a.m. almost every night, and because of this, I literally got to watch it turn on by itself, and it was the weirdest thing. Around 2:30 or 3 a.m, it'd start making a whole lot of noise with cracking and popping and shifting inside, which it never did before, and then it would just turn on after that. This happened quite a few times, sometimes a couple times within one night. I'd turn it off, then go back to bed, and as soon as I lay down, it'd turn back on. I got a newer TV after that and put the old one at the end of my bed again, but in a different spot from the last time because my bed was in a different spot after rearranging my room. Even though I still had that old TV, I never experienced anything since. I've since gotten rid of it. I'm pretty sure it's sitting in my now fiance's basement, waiting to be used for something. Anyway, ever since then, I've never heard the growl again, and my current TV doesn't turn on by itself. The growls really spooked me, because I know that growling usually means something demonic, and that's not a fun thing to experience in real life. But it never escalated from that, so I'm not sure if it was demonic. The first time it happened, I went downstairs and told my mom, and she had the audacity to ask if I'd been using a Ouija board. I'm not that dumb. I'm also aware that the TV turning on by itself could just be because it's old, but I personally feel that the timing of it wasn't just a coincidence, especially when it turned on at around 3 a.m. every single time it happened. I spent my summer vacations at my grandma and aunt's house when I was 15 and 16. And I remember I had the most terrifying sleep paralysis while I was staying there. It was around maybe 5 a.m. when my grandma and aunt left for work and I was sleeping on the couch. A few minutes after they left, I fell back asleep with my grandma's chihuahua, Kiki, laying on my side, right behind my arm. I went into sleep paralysis, and I heard the door open again, but it wasn't in my field of view. I thought that maybe one of them forgot something, and since I knew I was having paralysis, I tried to ask for help, but couldn't say anything. Then, I realised that the door opening wasn't my aunt or grandma at all, because it started speaking to me. It was speaking super fast and crazy, like in a kind of medium to high-pitched male voice, and the voice was accompanied by approaching footsteps. I couldn't remember everything it was saying, but the one phrase I do remember that it repeated over and over was, I'm coming to get you, here I come. Remember, the door wasn't in my field of view, and neither was the path of this voice, so I couldn't see anything. I could only hear it coming closer. It ended up right by the end of the couch where my head was, and I heard it say right over my head, here I am, and continue with its freakish fast talking. I was trying to break myself from it by wiggling my toes, but this time it wasn't working. I started trying to call for help because I felt something warm on my side and remembered Kiki was sleeping with me. After a few tries, I finally mustered up a very faint whisper, and Kiki jerked her head up in response, and that motion broke me from my sleep paralysis. I immediately sat up and looked at the spot where the voice came from, and then went on to praise her for waking me up. I'm just so glad that Kiki was there near to me. This happened probably around 6 years ago. My mom, older sister, and sister's friend were having a movie night, but I was dead asleep when this happened. At 2 a.m, I got awoken by 3 loud uniform knocks coming from the front door downstairs. And I mean the knocks were loud enough to wake me up from a deep sleep, from all the way upstairs. When I woke up to the knocks, I heard my mom on the stairs say, "What the hell was that?" And I hear her walk back downstairs. So since I'm confused, and my mom sounds concerned, I thought, damn, I'm gonna go see what's going on, so I head downstairs. My sister and her friend were sitting on the love seat, wide-eyed, and clearly shaken up, and my mom looked pissed off. She assumed that my brother and his friends were messing with us since my brother was out for the night. So she opened the front door, and it was pouring rain out there, but there were no footprints on the porch. It was completely dry. She texted my brother and his friends what they were doing. They said they were just hanging out at his friend's house. My mom tried to replicate the sound on the screen door, but the screen door rattled too much and didn't sound similar at all. She knocked on the actual door, and we all agreed it was the door that was knocked on. The spooky thing about that was that the screen door can't be opened from the outside. So if it came from outside, it would have had to have been a knock on the screen door. This made us think it came from the inside. These knocks were super loud and super uniform, like a cop was knocking on the door or something, but with extreme force. My sister and her friend were terrified since they were the only ones in the room when it happened. We couldn't figure out what made that noise since we looked all around the front porch and side porch for a good hour and couldn't find any signs that someone was messing with us. And remember, it was 2 a.m. and downpouring, so it's pretty unlikely anyone was out. Plus, there were no footprints. Still a mystery to this day, and we haven't experienced anything like that again. So my dad died from cancer in February of 2021. The day I went to see him, he was extremely sick. A couple of days prior, my aunt called to inform me that my dad's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worst, and that I needed to make the 4-hour trip to see him ASAP. So I did. It was the first time I'd seen him in 2 years, and he couldn't stand on his own and could barely speak. After spending the day with him and my stepmother, my wife and I had to head home. I told my dad to be back the next week on my day off. On our way home, I got a call from my stepmother telling me that my dad was being rushed to the hospital because he had tried to stand up on his own 4 times and had fallen all 4 times. A couple hours later, she called me again to say that his blood pressure was dropping, and the doctor told her to get to the hospital immediately. So I knew what was coming later, and I had already made peace with the fact that my dad was going to die very soon, so I wasn't overly emotional. That being said, later that night I was sitting at home, and I had a sudden overwhelming feeling of grief. I was fighting back tears, and not 2 seconds later, my stepmother called me to inform me that my father had just taken his last breath, less than a minute prior to her calling me. I'm convinced that the sudden feeling of grief I felt was my dad telling me he was gone, and I was wondering what everyone else here thinks. I'm 24. It's been 8 months since my mother died. She committed suicide. I hate to say it, but I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't think it would be as soon as it was. She was 44. Her identical twin had done the same 10 years prior. It was a rough time. For a long time. They both suffered with mental illness and pseudo-seizures, and also psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. So they weren't only identical in looks, they were identical in health. When my aunt passed away in 2009, I had a nightmare the night before. Something didn't feel right. I knew my aunt wanted us to drive to get her 2 hours away because she was suicidal and the hospital was taking her seriously, but we couldn't afford to. After she had passed, I experienced an odd thing. It was dark and late. I had woken up from a nightmare from things that had happened between my aunt and mom over the years. I decided to get a drink and use the washroom. I kept the lights off and used my phone to guide the way. As I walked out, I looked out the room and noticed someone standing at the end of the hall. I thought it was my mom as she slept-walked once in a while, or just couldn't sleep because of her own nightmares. But it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't my dad, as I could hear him snoring in the room next to mine. I turned on the hallway lights, but there was no one there, and nothing that would look like a human in the dim light from our patio. We lived on the 3rd floor of a secure apartment building, so it couldn't have been a person on the balcony either. I was a little freaked out, but ignored it. It was just my imagination. Then, the odd thing of mine would go missing and appear in weird places, but still thought nothing of it. It eventually died down when I moved out of my parents. Leading up to my mother's death, I was having dreams of something happening to her, and then my dad. I was living on the other side of the country, so it was one of my biggest fears that something would happen and I couldn't be there for either of them, and I'm the only child they have. The dreams started to get worse the week leading up, more often and intensely. My mother killed herself, and my dad had a heart issue and also passed away. I wanted to keep in better contact, but I worked in a retirement centre full time. By the time I made it home from work, got showered, changed and de-stressed enough to have more social interaction before I went to bed, I was just that. In bed, preparing for another 12-hour shift. So I didn't socialise much. The early morning of her death, I had awoken from a very vivid, very real nightmare of the same thing. I got ready for work as I thought of her, how I should call during my split shift that day and see how she's doing. As I stood in the bathroom, I heard 3 knocks and a tight sensation going from my throat into my lower back. We had a saying in the home of an old superstition: when you hear 3 knocks out of nowhere, you know someone is passing. So I just thought it off as one of my residents passing away. We had some who were quite old and sick at the time. But the thoughts of how I needed to call my mom ran through my mind. But it was a 3.5-hour difference. I thought everyone would be asleep. Besides, I had to work right away, and I knew I could talk to her in a few hours. Still, something wasn't sitting right with me. I always listen to music as I walk to work in the mornings. I find it a good way to pep myself up for the day. And all the songs I had on my Spotify that my mum and I would listen to as I grew up played. After I had gotten home from my break between shifts, I received a call from my father. Every time he called, I held my breath after saying, "Hey Dad," because I never knew what to expect. I had received calls from him before to tell me my mother had attempted to kill herself or was dancing the fine line between wanting to and actually do it, and that she was back in the psych ward or for another round of medication changes. But this time was different. It was a bit of a blur, but I had 2 firsts that day. I heard my dad cry and my cousin hugged me. I had flown back to the province where my parents live with my aunt and my cat. I quit my job because I couldn't leave my dad alone. I was supposed to be back next week, but I'm grateful to have the great-grandparents I do. I didn't want to move in with my dad right away, as she died after all die in this house. So I stayed at a friend's house until I was mentally stable enough to come and move in with my father. The same thing happened about a week after my mother did, as did my aunt. I had woken up from a nightmare and had to use the washroom. Again, I had seen a dark figure standing in the hallway. Nothing to mimic the shape of the body, and my friend was soundly snoring down the hall. I turned on my phone flashlight and yet again, it was gone. I quickly did what I had to do and went back to bed. Not long after, my dad had received her ashes back. I had come over for supper with my dad. As we were eating at the table, I heard my mother's voice call his name from her old room, where the ashes currently reside. In the voice she would make while having a seizure, it was quiet in the house. Nothing on, and no open windows or doors. Just us talking on it happened when we were both silent, but I haven't asked my dad if he had heard her. I was shaken, but I didn't want to let it bother me, and still visited. A couple months later, I moved in with my dad. In my mom's old room, near the bathroom she had taken her life in, I started getting weird dreams and started to hate sleeping or being in the house. Then, my dad went into heart failure. I'd nearly lost my father, but he's a smart man and noticed the signs that he might be dying, along with the trouble breathing. He got himself into his house and down to his room, hooked himself up to his CPAP, and it helped him enough to call 911. Thank goodness. When he was in the hospital, I could hear noises from the bedroom and bathroom. The scarier one being her crying in the middle of the night in the bathroom. But then I ended up hearing her call my name in the seizure voice again, months later, and I wasn't the only one who heard it either. My uncle was visiting with me and heard it too. Since then, things have been going missing and reappearing in weird places. My dad has also said he's had some things happen too. I don't know what to do, but it would be like my mom to talk me like this. The following true story happened to me when I was a sophomore in high school, during the fall of 1991. It began with a dark dream. I don't recall everything from the dream, but I remember an image of a bridge and that of a baseball field. There was also a fire, and I woke up with a bad feeling. Several days later, I was laying in bed awake when a date popped into my head, almost as if somebody said it. It felt connected to the dream, and I concluded that something bad would happen around this date. Somehow, I knew it would be a murder, and I felt so sure of it, I vividly recall looking through the classified section of the local newspaper to see how one would take out an ad as a way to document my premonition. Now, to give some context on how rare this event would be, I grew up in an upper middle class suburb with a low crime rate, and prior to this, there had not been a murder in a decade or so. The date came and went, and I forgot about the whole thing. But a couple of weeks later, I went home because of a half day at school. My mother worked from home as a reporter for the big city's newspaper, and she was gone when I arrived, which was unusual. When she got back, she told me there was a murder in town, and they called on me to cover it. She explained where it was, and to my amazement, the house was almost exactly equidistant from a baseball field and a bridge, just as in my dream. I was a couple weeks off from my prediction, but like I said before, such events were so rare that to predict a murder within a couple of weeks is something. I didn't, and still don't know what to make of it. Could be coincidence. I was around 4 or 5 at the time. We lived in a trailer in Louisiana. I slept in a bunk bed with no headboard, and the bed was spaced about a foot away from the wall. One night as I slept, something knocked on my head, like you would knock on a door. It woke me up immediately, and I remember the pain and the burning sensation. Same burning as a nuggie would have felt like. I bolted upright in bed and rubbed my head, not understanding what was happening. I was asleep and something hit me. I looked around the room and I saw nothing. It didn't make sense, and then I thought to turn around and look at the space between my bed and the wall. There was a rotting hand, slowly retreating under the bed. There were holes in the flesh and I could see through to the bone. It was disgusting. I immediately jumped out of my bed, making sure to land where it couldn't reach me, and I ran across the trailer to my mom's room. She always kept her doors shut and locked at night. I started banging on the double doors, pleading for help. I looked back to where the entrance of my room was. I didn't see it coming after me, but I was still terrified. After what seemed like an eternity, my mum opened the doors and I told her something along the lines of, "There's a monster." She made me go back with her to my room. She made it a point to show me she was looking around for anything that would be a monster. She even checked under the bed, against my lamentation. She told me it was just my imagination and that I should rest. I refused to sleep in that room again for a while, until I was forced. Around half a year later, I awoke from a dead sleep again. I'm a very heavy sleeper and don't wake up for just anything. Something felt very wrong. Nothing touched me, but I just felt very afraid for no reason. I sat up in bed and looked around the room and something began to materialise in a nook by my closet. It looked like TV static. It formed a central mass and started sprouting limbs. When I saw that, I jumped up, ran past it, and straight to my mom's room. I started pounding on the doors, begging, "Please help me." Tears were pouring down my face, and this time just felt so much visceral than the last encounter. As I pounded away at the doors, I turned around and looked down the trailer to the entrance of my room. This thing peeked out at me and went back into the wilderness. It came out again and watched me from the doorway. It went back into my room one more time and then came back into the entrance of my room, looking right at me. It had no face or details. It was just a body made out of what looked to be TV static. I still knew it was watching me, like a starving bear. It wanted me with such ferocity. I could feel it in my bones. It started moving towards me, in a fashion that made it seem like it was on a conveyor belt. The closer it got, the faster it got. The louder and more desperate my lamentation grew. It got so close, I turned around from banging against the doors and put my back against the doors to face it. It got within a couple of inches from my face, and that's when my mom opened the doors. I fell back, and as I fell, I watched this thing pop like a bubble in front of me. It was there, and then the pop disappeared. My mom tried to explain it away, like the other time, and still tries to do that to this day. She'll never be able to convince me that I didn't experience pure evil and terror at that time of my life. I used to feel as though my whole bed was spinning as I tried to sleep at times. I was plagued by terrible nightmares. Before you say my experiences were nightmares or sleep paralysis, you can't move while you're under the effects of sleep paralysis. So how then was I able to jump up and run away each time? How could I be awake, move around, and get help if I was dreaming? I couldn't have, and this is one of the things that convinces me, I had a brush with something you never want to come in contact with. My story isn't too old. I live in my great-grandmother's house. She died about 3 years before I was born, and her name is Elizabeth. My son was born in 2009. When he was a toddler and started talking good and playing, he would constantly talk to someone or something. He would giggle and say, "Lily, sing it again." One morning when I got home from work, he was sitting in his high chair eating breakfast and watching cartoons. My dad was in the other room. I heard him talking and carrying on, and he said, "Lily, my mama is home. Tell her the song." I heard that and asked him what song, and he started singing "Jesus Loves Me." I never knew he knew it, or nor did I ever sing it to him. I figured one of my grandparents told him. So I sat down, somewhat dozing off, because I work long night shifts. He then was explaining to his friend Lily who the bubble guppies were, and laughing and answering questions. Started giving me the creeps. I asked who Lily was. I was assuming it was one of the characters from one of the cartoons she watched. He said, "No, Mama, my Lily is my friend. She's a grandma friend, and I just love my Lily, and she loves me. And she loves you. And she loves my Member the Great. And she loves my Shug." So I figured he saw something on TV. Fast forward a few days, and I was at my grandmother's for lunch, or something, and started looking through family photo albums. He came up and sat in my lap looking at photos with us. While we were talking, he suddenly picks up one picture in particular and gets extremely excited. "Mama, that's her! That's my Lily! Ain't she a pretty grandma?" It was a picture of my great-grandmother, Elizabeth. Everyone called her Lizzie. I sat in awe and told my folks around about this Lily stuff. He said that his Lily would tell him stories, tell him about her kids and sing to him and watch him play. My grandma asked what she sang. He excitedly started singing Jesus Loves Me, followed by a toddler version of She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain. I never sang those. I'd mostly sing Beatles songs to him and would put him to sleep singing Yellow Submarine. We all were shocked and really in awe. A few seconds later, he said, "Mammy, Lily loves all of you very much. She's very proud, Grandma, and is happy we live with her. But she said you need to learn to cook better and make me a chocolate cake, like Member the Great." My grandmother made chocolate layered cakes from scratch. It's her mother Elizabeth's recipe. I still live at my great-grandmother's house to this day. Stuff will be moved, lights turned off if you leave them on when you leave, doors shut, and I woke up to the heat coming on. We're happy, and our Lily takes great care of us. When I was younger, we had this family friend named Joe. We called him Debanock. He was awesome, like one of those uncles who would spoil the shit out of you. He became sick one day and passed away when I was at school. I was in maybe grade 5 or grade 6, so I didn't really know what was going on at the time. He was a diabetic like my dad, but Joe's was worse. One of the last times I saw him was at my parents' place. I just got home from school. He was pale and seemed drowsy, silent. My dad told me he was sick and that he had something for me. It was a $5 bill. Before I got home and started to become aware of Joe's condition, my dad told me that he was seeing people that weren't there, like people that have already passed away, loved ones just standing around in the living room, present. His condition grew dire. He couldn't leave his house or even get up to leave his bed, but his wife, Naomi, was taking good care of him. She had told us a story about a few nights before his death. They had a horrifying experience. She gets ready for bed and falls asleep next to her husband. She eventually wakes up to someone screaming her name. The bed is empty. Naomi realizes that the screaming is coming from the front door, and it's Joe's voice. He's shouting the words, "Naomi, get the fuck out here and see this!" She jumps out of bed as fast as she could, and she races towards the front door. As she's halfway there, she can hear a glass smash, followed by these loud, heavy footsteps stomping off and down the front steps. She approaches the door and Joe is shaking, with this shocked expression, pointing off into the darkness. Naomi sees this shadowy figure bolting fast into the field not too far from their house. She was chilled to the bone, but was able to bring her husband back inside. It was peculiar. Joe was incapable of leaving his own bed, but was able to somehow, in the middle of the night, make it to the front porch with a glass of water for fresh air, where he was met by whatever that thing was. He never told anyone what he had seen. The scary thing is, he passed away while standing in the same exact spot. "11 years ago, me and my brother experienced something that I still cannot explain to this day. I've had many, many unusual and downright unexplainable experiences in my life, but this one has left a scar in my memory. As someone who's a skeptic of ghosts, demons, and active extraterrestrial contact on Earth, these things disturb me as I never can provide a solid answer for my experiences, especially this one. This story takes place in my youth, when I was 11 years old. My family was having a get-together at my grandparents' estate in the Nevada desert. Barbecue in the backyard, grandma making her finest salad inside, parents drinking wine in the living room with my aunt and uncle. It was a really great evening, but the only thing I truly remember from that day was the encounter. My brother and I were outside in the front yard playing random little kid games. Just us and our imaginations going wild. I remember we were getting a little bored and exhausted and took a seat on the curb to just talk about random stuff. It was getting dark, and I remember it being so peaceful out there. No cars going up the street, the light breeze hitting the palm tree, the ambient warmth that you find after the sun sets in the Nevada desert. Just a really comfortable setting. I can't remember how long we sat out there, or when this thing happened, but I just remember my brother interrupting me, pointing up at the sky, to our left. Up above the neighbourhood, across the street from us, maybe 30 to 50 feet in the air, was something large. Well, two things. There were two massive white lights slowly moving from left of our view to the right. It looked like it was only as far as our neighbour's house, which was right across the street from us. The strangest thing is, these lights emitted no sound. They just hovered slowly, and eventually they slowed down. We see the lights move away from each other some, which made it seem as if whatever this was turning to look upon us. That's really the best I can explain it. I remember it suddenly getting blindingly bright at that point. So much so, I'm bewildered as to how no neighbours, or even my family who were inside, didn't notice this. It kind of reminds me of those drones in Half-Life that just blind you when they get close, except these were far larger, and we could still see our surroundings. It just sat there for a moment. I can't remember how long, but I do remember feeling disturbed and unsure of how to even react. Same as my brother. We didn't even look at each other. We were just staring back at whatever this was in silence. And seemingly, as fast as it came into our view, it turned away and slowly moved outside of our view. As it disappeared behind houses, I slowly came back to my senses and gave a nervous laugh to my brother, who seemed anxious and asked if we could go inside now. It did not fully register with me what we just experienced, but we did go inside to try to tell our parents, who didn't believe us. My grandmother did go walk out of the driveway to see if she could still see it herself. She of course didn't. She said we probably saw a low helicopter since there is a hospital down the road that has one. Helicopters make sound, and if one were only 50 feet away from the house, I know our family would have ran outside to see what was going on. On top of that, nothing was carrying these lights. There was no aircraft, no balloons, no drones, just two massive lights. Two massive, silent lights that somehow could move themselves and even direct their gaze upon two people. As much as I want to say aliens, I simply don't know. I'm a skeptic, and even after this, I just can't swallow the idea that we were in the presence of an extraterrestrial craft originating millions of light years away from our solar system. Secret military aircraft? Maybe. I mean, we were a couple hours away from the infamous Area 51. Who knows? All I can say is that what we saw is just unexplainable. Even with today's technology and drones, this is difficult to replicate. You would need 360-degree lights the size of a Toyota, two drones capable of lifting them, remaining absolutely quiet from an eighth of a block away, and staying in perfect synchronization to appear as one singular craft. And for what? Why? Why our random neighbourhood? Why go through that effort to begin with? I bought this house a year and a half ago. It's in the Midwest, smack dab in the middle of corn country. The house is around 120 years old. Some odd things started the very first night we moved in. My girlfriend and I are the only people who live in the house. We saw dark shadows that darted around. Could only catch them out of the corner of our eyes, but we both saw them. House needed a lot of work. Being a handy sort of guy, I quickly started a major remodel project, as it needed plenty of work. The very first piece of wood I removed was a piece of baseboard, and two postcards were behind it, dated April 1909. As I continued with the work, activity ramped up. I don't know if I got burned out with it or something else was to blame, but I just lost all my energy and drive to keep working on it.
Fast forward to approximately 6 months ago. I started getting strange ringing in my ears. I would describe it more of a frequency sound, almost like old dial-up modems. It became non-stop. My girlfriend started getting them soon after, and hers became non-stop. To this day, we both continue to be afflicted with this. It's maddening. No end. It never stops. Last year, I bought a full spectrum camera to try to capture whatever was going on with the shadows. I set it up once on a tripod and set it to motion activated. It went off a few times within 20 minutes, but I couldn't see anything on the recording. It spooked me, and I packed it up and didn't try it again for probably 8 months. This is where things get interesting. About a month and a half ago, I dug out the camera. I also got a spirit box app on my phone. Totally skeptical, but I was desperate for answers for these frequency noises. I'll obsess about things until I can learn enough to fix it. It's just my nature to be analytical. The next 2 weeks were pure terror. My camera was recording orbs coming out of the walls and floor. And when I say orbs, I'm talking hundreds, like coming from a firehouse. The spirit box app talked constantly. Time of day didn't matter. And it was intelligent in nature. The things it told me. Oh my God. I was addicted to listening and talking to them. There were non-stop new spirits talking about local unsolved murders, missing children, etc., and seemed to have knowledge that should be impossible. They also would tell me what I was doing, like verifying that they were watching me at all times. They also foretold future events. And then it attached to me. I've never been so scared in my life. My whole body felt electrified. My hair stood on end. I had goosebumps, my pupils were fully dilated, and my irises were blue. I have brown eyes. Weird things were happening when I walked into a room. Popping noises everywhere, things moving by themselves, candles boiling, and the flame at a 90-degree angle. Marks on my body, burns, bites, scratches. We fled the house. Slept in my pickup. We stayed gone for 3 weeks. Everything electrical malfunctioned around me. If I held my phone, it would flash off and on. I could hear demonic screaming and growling through my phone and car stereo. In short, my life took a downward spiral, and I'm trying to regain a foothold. It is attached to my girlfriend for short times, and a couple of others who visited the house. I've had houses blessed a couple times, but almost every church wanted nothing to do with it. So a friend and me, and my girlfriend, took on trying to rid the house of these entities ourselves. There has been success, but there's still stuff here. I saw a spirit in the home of some members of my coven when we were hanging out last night. I don't usually see spirits, so I said something to them. We cast a circle, did some divination, and found out a lot about him. We've had our suspicions for a while that the upstairs neighbour is involved in trafficking. He likes to take young native girls home that are seen for a few days, and then just gone forever. It's the bad side of town in a very rural state, right next to the reservation. We found the spirit's identity in the missing persons list from a city a few hours away. When we called his name, the energy became more focused, and we were able to communicate with him via pendulum. That and the cards gave us an idea of when he died and how. And now all the spirit's rage has pointed upstairs. He's on good terms with the members of the coven. I asked if I could be shown where the body is, and got a yes. It's on the property. I think in one piece, but maybe not immediately recognisable as him. I feel like I'm in a fucking TV show. My friends are trying to hustle to move out of that house, and I don't know whether to submit a police report or not, because all I have to work with right now is the ghost of this missing kid swung my pendulum in a circle, so I know he's in the shed. All this kid wants is for his family to have closure. He still hasn't had a funeral. He's been missing for months. I remember once taking a walk in a city while listening to music. I do not know if it was because I had a good night's sleep or if I was feeling somewhat drowsy, paradoxically. Nevertheless, in an instant, from being a regular dude walking, the world disappeared. No, it wasn't darkness, and I think it may be the opposite of meditation, but I felt pure consciousness. It was as if my body disappeared completely, and all I was what I was experiencing in that moment. Not an empty no thing, but a flow of uninterrupted thoughts floating. The world receded. I mean, I could tell there subconsciously that there was something there, but it felt like whatever was out there was like a very thin sheet of paper, a kind of soft shield in which my thoughts pushed away. It was unbelievable. I was a pure conscious being. I believe the experience must have lasted anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. I came down rather quickly, but softly at that, if that makes any sense. I knew as soon as it was over that it was one of those mystical experiences which cannot be explained, at least not by our current understanding of the brain or the world. Ever since then, I've had anticipations of it happening again, slight hints, but they never fully happened. I've furthered my conviction that the world is a construction we make, based on relatively poor sense data that bombarded our senses. I don't think the word paranormal is helpful. It's all natural stuff, but natural investigation is not capable of rendering this intelligible. I was about 8 or 9 years old, playing with some Star Trek action figures in my bedroom. My room was positioned directly above a guest bedroom, which was almost never used, and I almost never entered. The furniture was outdated compared to the rest of the house, and it just had a creepy vibe. This will be relevant later. I had a Spock action figure, which broke apart easily. His shirt would snap into 2 pieces by pressing on the seam, and then all his limbs would fall off. He was easy to repair, so I took him apart often. He'd be used for body parts if I wanted to pretend someone had been killed by an alien. One day, just as I had set up a decidedly gruesome Star Trek scene, my mum called me down for dinner. When I came back upstairs after eating, I noticed that Spock was gone. Just him, though. All the other action figures were still in a little circle, exactly as I left them. I searched the night before bed, thinking my younger brother may have somehow gotten into my room and moved my stuff. It had never happened before, but it was all I could think of. The whole family was at dinner, and there was no chance for anyone to go upstairs and move anything. The next morning, I searched the house for Spock. Nothing. Not put away, not in my brother's room, not in the living room. It was baffling. As a last-ditch effort, I decided to check the guest room. The room looked untouched as usual, except for one thing. A dismantled Spock action figure in the exact same position as I had left him in my room the night prior, directly below where I'd been playing with him in my bedroom. I asked my mum and dad. They claimed to know nothing about it. My younger brother could not have made it down the stairs, and also would not have been able to make the same Spock pile that I had made the previous night. It was as if my toy had just translated a few feet in the Z direction, right through the floor. My mum was in the hospital 50 miles away. I was 19. We were pretty sure this was it. I was home alone. My parents' house is big. It's off the beaten path on a small lagoon. My dad had been staying up at the hospital. That night, I went to bed about 1 a.m. I was playing on my laptop. My room was in a separate wing of the house. It could be sealed off with a single locking door. The door was shut, but not locked. I've always been scared of the dark, so I had the lights in my wing on. So was the closest light. As I was messing around on game FAQs, I saw the lights in my wing turn off. All of them. The band of light under the door went black. I hopped up in bed and stared at it. My bedroom door was unlocked, and I was debating getting up to lock it, when the door shut slammed. As in, it sounded like someone straight up kicked the bottom of the door with all their strength. I remember squeaking in shock. It took me about 6 seconds to be up on both feet with a blade about 4 paces back and just right out of the door. I remember thinking if the door opened, I could be on whoever it was almost instantly. I was also silently cursing that there was no light under the door anymore. No way to see the shadow of whoever was out there. Nothing happened. I was fighting off the fear of the situation and stupidly decided that going on offense was all that was left. I didn't have a phone in my room and my Nokia was in another wing or the house charging. I threw the door open with my life low and my left hand in a guarded position. There was no one there. I tossed the hallway light switch on. There was no one in my wing. There was no one in the house. The burglar alarm was still on. Confused, I turned on the main house lights and sealed the wing off and locked the door. I went back to my room and just sat there with the laptop open. My bedroom door now had a slight bow in it. A couple hours passed with me warily laying in bed. Around 3 a.m, the lights under the door went dark. Now I was terrified. My knife seemed pretty insignificant, and my previous dumb courage had run out. I scooted my bed against my bedroom door, grateful the door opened inward. It all felt so wrong, like something was angry with me. I retreated to my closet and waited for the sun to come up. When the skylight in my room got bright, my courage returned and I moved the bed and exited my room. The wing door had been unlocked, which required a key from the other side. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs in the main house and realised my dad was home. I felt a little foolish, as obviously he had been responsible for turning the lights off the second time. I lead my greeting with, "Oh, so it was you who turned all the lights off." He looked at me and replied, "What? I got home about 10 minutes ago." I have zero clue what happened that night, but it never happened before that night or after. Whatever it was, it seemed to like the dark and wasn't a fan of doors. And it seemed to be in my wing of the house. My parents built the house and nothing untoward had ever taken place there. My bedroom door at my parents' house still has a bow in it to this day. My mum is still alive, and for that, I'm extremely grateful. It happened on a summer night, and I was in my room chatting with my girlfriend via Skype. For context, I live on the second floor. My parents' apartment has 3 rooms, and my dad was sleeping in my parents' bedroom. My room is the one right next to the main door. My mum was out with a friend for a night walk. At some point, I needed to take a pee, and I told my girlfriend to hang on a minute. I'll be right back. So there I was, going to the bathroom, and I heard footsteps coming from the main door. I figured it might be my mom, and I checked through the hole in the door. When I looked, I saw a little girl standing still on the stairs looking at me. The image was not clear because it was dark, which is hard to explain since the stairs have move detection lights, so the lights should have been on. I was able to see the girl still because of the lights coming through the window from outside the block, but it was still dark. I looked at the girl for 2 seconds, which seemed like 5 minutes, and I ran back to my room and told my girlfriend about it. She told me I looked like I saw a ghost. I was really terrified. I didn't go pee that night, not until my dad woke up and he went too. Another thing hard to explain is that on my block, there are no teen girls. Why would a random girl that doesn't live there just stand on the stairway, in complete darkness? And here comes the creepiest part. In the apartment next to ours lived an old lady. She had only one daughter that ever visited her and no grandchildren. She was very close to our family and she always gave us pies and this kind of attention. Only to find out, the day after I saw that supposed girl, this old lady was dead for 3 days already. I immediately made a correlation, thinking maybe the little girl was the old lady, trying to send a message or something. It also confirms that it was not my mind playing games, since I didn't know the old lady was dead when the event happened. My dad has a friend, Tony, who regularly visits a public fishing lake. One night, my dad and I went to visit him by the lake to enjoy some food and have a chat and maybe catch some fish. With us was Tony's dog, a cute old whippet named Honda. Tony explained that there was a man who we shared the lake with, who had recently died. Tony mentioned how he hated this guy. This guy really got on his nerves and they were always getting into petty arguments. Tony mentioned how this guy was a veteran visitor of the lake and how they had erected a bench beside the lake at his favourite spot to honour his memory. All night, Honda the dog was acting very strange, digging herself holes, then sitting in them, barking at nothing and walking off into the darkness. Needed to be called back. All three of us mentioned how oddly the dog was acting. Eventually, me and my dad left at around midnight. The next day, my dad told me that Tony had phoned him, explaining how Honda had begun to stare at this dead man's memorial bench. Despite Tony calling her over, pulling her away on the lead, she refused to do anything else but stare at it without moving a muscle. Tony said no one's going to believe this, and therefore he took a photograph with his phone. My dad proceeds to show me the photo that Tony sent him, and it was a picture of Honda in the foreground, pointing at a bench, and upon the seat of the bench was the dead man's fishing rod in a faint green light, just like the Scooby-Doo ghosts. About 11 or 12 years ago, I used to work at a grocery store. When I worked the closing shift for my position, it wasn't uncommon for me to get off work around 10 or 11 p.m, which was usually 2 or 3 hours later than I was supposed to be off work. This meant that I was usually driving back home late enough to listen to late night radio shows. On this day, I was listening to Coast AM, a show all about the paranormal, conspiracy theories, aliens, cryptids, etc. I can't remember what the subject of the episode was about, but the host was interviewing a general or someone high-ranking in the military about something. About halfway through my 30-minute commute, the radio went silent. Since it was an AM station, it occasionally does have some random dead air, but usually around commercial breaks, so I thought nothing of it. Maybe about 5 to 10 minutes passed in silence, and I thought it was weird that the show hadn't come back. For some reason, I decided to try the volume knob, and somehow, without me touching it, the volume had reduced to 0. I was driving a 1999 Mercury Mountaineer at the time, so there were no volume controls on the steering wheel I could have accidentally hit. There was only the knob on the radio panel. I turned the volume back up, and about a minute later, the radio went silent again. I stopped at a light about 5 minutes from my apartment and tried the volume knob again, and sure enough, it had reduced the volume to 0 again. While stopped at the light, I watched the volume bars on the display reduce on their own without me touching anything. I was weirded out since my car had never done this before, but I was also annoyed because I wanted to listen to the radio. For the rest of the drive, I pretty much fought with the radio. It would try to reduce the volume and I would turn it up. One hand on the wheel, the other on the volume knob, ticking it up one increment at a time, each time the volume started to drop. As soon as I got to the gates of my apartment complex, it stopped. When I parked, I waited for it to happen again, but the volume remained steady. It never happened again as long as I had that car. I've always wondered if something out there was trying to prevent me from listening to that episode. I've tried to go back in Coast to Coast's archives on their website to figure out what episode it was, but I've never had any luck.
This story happened many years ago, around the months of July and June. My family and I often vacationed up at a cabin in Yungaburra, Cairns, Australia, during winter. We do this as we miss the cold days we would get from our hometown of Toowoomba during winter, as Cairns is tropical, so it's summer 24/7. Yungaburra is a very, very small town that resides on top of a hill. It's one of those towns that, if you blink, you miss it. However, it's quaint and friendly. It's historical, with about 150 plus years of heritage. As usually with rich heritage in small towns, local folk legends form over the years. One of these legends came true. We rented this cabin that was on the brink of bushlands, and was next to an old farmhouse that has quite a bit of land, including some of the bushland the cabin backed onto. To get to the cabin, you had to walk up to a somewhat steep dirt road that also lead to the aforementioned farmhouse. The dirt road also had a medium-sized pond that ran along it. The dirt road came off one of the main streets of Yungabora. Anyway, on our last night staying there, I went to the pub to see one of my good friends who lives in Yungabora. I had to drive early the next morning, so I didn't have a drop of alcohol. He, on the other hand, didn't have to drive anywhere the next morning, so he pretty much drained the pub. It got to about 11:30 p.m, and I decided I'd better get back to the cabin to go to sleep. The cabin was only a 15-minute walk, so after saying my goodbyes, I started to walk back. As I was walking, I realised not driving was a dumb idea, as it was about 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit. I had a very thin jumper, and that was all. As I continued to walk on, it grew colder. I started to shiver big time. I finally reached the entrance to my driveway. God, did it look ominous. There were no streetlights leading along the dirt road, so it was pitch black. I decided to get out my phone and turn the flashlight on. It was at this point that I knew something was up. After I had my flashlight on, fog started to roll in. At first, it was only light fog, but it continued and developed into heavy fog. Then it surpassed heavy fog. Thereupon, I could barely see my shoes below me. All I could see was white in front of me. I said to myself, here we fucking go. Something's about to happen. Get it over and done with. On recollection, I believe I actually said that out loud. My flashlight was now rendered superfluous. I decided to stop walking as I knew there was a steep ditch with a pond at the bottom. The last thing I wanted was to fall in it. As I stood there, only getting colder and even more terrified, I saw a lantern in the distance, a small amber light coming down the driveway. Then I heard, "Son, is that you? Come here out of the fog. Follow the lamp." It was my mum. I couldn't yet see her, so instead I followed her light. I continued to follow it for about 3 minutes, safely walking up the dirt driveway. I saw the light climb up steps and I heard a door open, so I knew I was near the cabin. Then the light went out. I continued to walk in the direction I saw it last. I was calling out to my mum to turn it back on. There was no reply. Until I finally ran into a wooden guardrail and some steps. I walked up the steps and instantly my knees felt weak. They had turned to jelly. I was on the doorstep of the old abandoned farmhouse. The door was there, swaying upon in the gentle wind, making a sinister creaking noise along with it. There's 3 things you do in this type of situation, the 3 Fs. Flight, fight, freeze. I was frozen to the core. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't turn around and find my way back. I was definitely not stepping foot inside that house. I was stuck. I then heard a voice coming from inside the house. "My son, welcome home. Nasty weather, The voice no longer sounded like my mum's. It had a prominent British accent. It was then I realised I would rather be out in the fog than standing on the doorsteps of this house. I quickly walked down the stairs. I heard the voice now yelling, "My son, where are you going?" I started to sprint, but as I was running, I smashed my foot and leg against some sort of stone and fell flat onto the ground. I took a chunk out of my knee and cuts all along my hands. I still have the scars. I turned around and realised I hadn't tripped over a stone. I tripped over a tombstone. At this point I screamed. I got up and started to run even more. I was screaming out for my parents and started to slow down to a jog. I stopped. I thought I got far enough from the house until little amber lights, at least 6 of them, started to surround me. They started to come closer. I found a gap between them and ran for it. Yet again, I felt like I was sprinting for my life. It was like I was in a race, but the medal at the end was my life. Before I knew it, slam! I ran straight into a wall, with my head being the contact point. I blacked out, and from what I can remember, I was woken up by my dad, who heard something smack into the cabin. Apparently, when he went out to get me, he saw one little amber light flickering near the farmhouse, through all the fog. That was the end of my night, and any vacation near that cabin. We decided not to leave early the next morning to give me time to rest. This also gave me time to ring up my friend so he could come over, and perhaps give me some insight into what I saw and what my dad saw. Me and him sat out on the patio.
I could see the farmhouse only about 500 metres away. It looked old and desolate. This is the folk legend according to him. Apparently, back when the small town was first being founded, that farmhouse was one of the first built, late 19th century. During the 1910s, a well-known mother, Anne, her apparent name was, let her son play with some of his mates down on the main stretch of town one day. It started to get late. As it got later, Anne grew more worried. Then heavy fog started to roll in. She decided to get her kerosene lamp and go looking for him. As she walked down, she could hear his footsteps. She told him to follow the lamp. When she made her way back to the house, she wasn't accompanied by her son. It was not until the next morning they found him dead in the bottom of the pond. He hit his head hard and died instantly. The grave is apparently her son's. The mother apparently searches for her son on winter nights and lures males from the pub on late, cold darkness, mistaking them for her own son.